The Gemara had a shaila. If somebody's climbing up a ladder and then the rung gives way and he falls down, where it's aliyah l'tzayich yerida, right? So the Gemara wanted to equate it with yerida l'tzayich aliyah. So we learned pshat yesterday that the person fell off the ladder and the person fell on somebody and the person killed somebody b'shayki. But Tosfos doesn't learn that way. Tosfos learns that the rung fell off, and the rung fell and killed somebody. So he has a slightly different shot in the sugya, but I just wanted to speak that out. That Tosfos learns that it was the rung that fell, not the person. Okay, let's see the Mishnah. Hazarik Evan l'shus harabim. If one throws an Evan into Rishus Rabbim. Oh, but today, if I'm not mistaken, is the Yortzeit of Rabbi Yosy Ber, who was the Rosh Hashiva of YU. Today, I believe this is Yortzeit. Hazarik Evan Rishus Rabbim. Someone threw a stone into Rishus Rabbim, and it landed on somebody and killed somebody. Hareza Goyla, that's Shoygeg, and the person goes into Golas. The Gemara is going to discuss why is that a Shoygeg? If you throw a stone into a crowd where it's likely that you'll kill somebody, why is that goyla? But the Gemara is going to discuss the details of what happened, because the devil is always in the details. What if someone threw a stone into Rosh Hashanah, but based on the projectile's route, it wouldn't have hit anybody, right? Nowadays with the Iron Dome, as soon as a missile is launched, the computer could tell already where it's going to land. So if it wasn't supposed to hit anybody, it was going to land in an open field. I'm sorry? And the guy stuck his head out. And the kibla, and because of that, now he's in the path of the stone, and he gets killed. There's a razor pot. What if he threw the Evan into his own chotzer? V'harag, and somebody was there, and that person got killed. If the nizik had a right to be there, well, then goyla, then he would go into golos. But the imlav, if the nizik does not have reshus to be there, einay goyla, the mazik is not goyla. Shenemar b'asher yavoy esrei eyu bayar. Where did this incident occur? In the forest. Mahayar reshus lo nizik ulamazik likanish l'sham. Just like a yar, both the mazik and the nizik has access to it. They can be there. Av kol reshus lo nizik ulamazik likanish l'sham yotza chatzar balabayis. This excludes if someone trespasses into somebody else's property and then he gets killed. She'ein reshus lo nizik likanish l'sham, where the nizik doesn't have a right to be there, and therefore the mazik will not go into goals.
Even if he knows that the guy's there?
Apparently, even if he knows the guy's there. Now, I'm not sure, see, knowing the guy's there is one thing, but if he's aiming at the guy to kill him, that's mazit. I don't know if this p'tur applies to mazit. This p'tur only applies to shogeg. So if he knows the guy's there and he's throwing a rock right at him, that might cross over into mazit. Abba Shol. Now, before we learn Abba Shol, we need to look at the pasuk that discusses what happened. So it says, "Vasher Yavoy Esrei Eyu Bayar." Someone encounters his friends in the forest, Lach Toivetzim, to chop wood. The Nitchi Yodoi Bagarzen, and his hand pushed the metal. Lichoshetz v'noshel avarz. So this happened in the case of a Lach Toivetzim. So Abba Shol Darshans, Macha Tovas Eitzim. Rishus, Afkol Rishus. You know when we say that if someone was in the middle of doing something and inadvertently killed somebody, there's a chiv golus. That's if what he was doing was a dover rishus. But if it was a dvar mitzvah, yotza ha'av ha'makas benoi, ha'rav ha'roides talmidoi, a father who hits his son to be mechanechem, which is a mitzvah, or a rebbe, it doesn't say makas as roide, but it also means hitting his talmud. Today you go to jail for that. What? Right, today you go to jail for that. But if a rabbi writes Talmidoi or a shlich bezdin, if a shlich bezdin is in the middle of carrying out some type of din on a person and the person dies, there's no din golos for that because that was a dvar mitzvah. Zok Tehelig Gemara. L'Rishus Harabim. Break the Gemara. If he threw a rock into Rishus Harabim, he knows he's going to kill somebody. Mezidhu. So why in the world should that be shogig and he have the kapara of goals? Amar Shmuel bar Yitzchak. You know what the case was? B'soiser is koisli. He didn't throw something into Rishus Harabim. He was knocking his wall down, and it fell into the Rishus Harabim and killed somebody. But still, if you're, that's called criminal negligence. If you're not even looking and you're letting rocks and boulders from your wall just fall into Rishus Harabim, that's already carved amazing because you know it's likely someone would be walking by. And for the Gemara, b'soiser is koisloi balayla. You're doing it at night. Most people aren't on the roads at night, so the assumption is that no one's going to be there. But for the Gemara, it doesn't matter. It's a Rishus Harabim. Balayla nami iboya layli yune. It's incumbent upon this person who's infringing on the Rishus Harabim to check. And for the Gemara, b'soiser is koisloi la ashba. He's adjacent to an ashba, and he's knocking his wall down, and things are falling to an ashba. The ashba is a place where nobody goes. Let's see if Rashi comments directly on the ashba. Rashi says, no, Rashi does not comment directly on the ashba. Okay, Gabaltik. Frag the Gemara, hi ashba hechadami. Ishchichi barabim. If it's normal for people to go there, because what people used to do is they used to relieve themselves in an ashba. So people are there because they have to relieve themselves. Well, then Paishayahu, it's no different than if he was doing this into a Rishus Harabim. And if people never go there, then onasu, he's a complete honest. Viter, he shouldn't go into goals. We're dancing a fine line between oinus and mezid, and shogig only fits into a small selection or slice of the pie. Zok to Gemara, Amar Papa Latricha El Ashba, Pasuya Lifanis Ba Belayla, Vena Suya Lifanis Ba B'Yoyim. People relieve themselves there, but not during the day, where what passers-by could see. At night, when it's discreet, that's when people use the bathroom. However, the Iker the Mikri v'Yosef, from time to time, if someone needs to relieve themselves during the day, they'll go as well. So now we're changing. This didn't occur at night, like the Gemara suggested earlier. Rather, this murder, b'shogig, occurred during the day because it's highly unlikely that anybody would be found in the ashba. That's when he was throwing the rocks of his house into the ashba. So pesheya lehava, he's not a pesheya. People didn't relieve themselves there by day. Unlike what the Gemara said that even at night in the Rishus Harabim, that's if it's normal for people to go there. But if no one ever goes there by day, then it's a shogig. So Nachama. But it does happen from time to time. So therefore, he's not mamish pesheya. People aren't there during the day. But it's not kar of the mezid, and therefore people do go there sometimes, and therefore it's a shogig. So I always find these Gemaras to be a little difficult because the Gemara is picking a very specific case that fits in this thin slice of the pie. The reason why I find these difficult is because I wouldn't know how to evaluate another similar case that's not an ashba to make sure it meets the same level of priyaninus. For that you need a person who could be maven davar, mitoich davar, and who can say, okay, this other case is similar to that. Since we're talking about an ashba, that's something like how do you compare that to a different scenario? For that you need person. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov said that if when you threw the rock, it was not going to hit anything, and then someone stuck his head into the path of the rock, you're potter. How do we know that? Because this is umotza. So what does it say again? It says, it found your friend. If when you shot the rock, its projectile is going to hit a person, that's what the Torah is referring to in the Parsha of Golos. But if it wasn't going to hit a person and someone made himself in the path of the stone that now he's going to get hurt, that's not included in the mitzvah of Makos. Nikan number below when Yaakov, then Haitzi Hala Esroishai, the Kibla, and he received the rock, Potter, the Mazik will be Potter. Zok to Gemara, so basically, what you're saying is the Memra, the Matzah Meikara Mashma. It must be that when the pasuk says Matzah, Matzah means that it was always destined to hit the victim. That's what the Matzah means. The moment it left the hand of the Mazik, it was destined to hit the victim, and that's what Umatzah means. I'm going to demonstrate that Umatzah could mean that when it left my hand, it wasn't destined to happen, and it only happened later when someone stuck his head in the path. Where do you see that? Because it says Umatzah in a different pasuk, which talks about someone who sells a stei achuzah. If you sell a stei achuzah, someone's going through a whole transaction. You can't just buy it back. So let's have a look at the pasuk. I'm looking at the Torah Arashalom. It says, "Ish kiloi yiyaloi goyel." If someone doesn't have, he sold a stei achuzah, and he doesn't have anyone to help him buy it back. So ideally, if he has a relative who can bail that soda for him, they do that. But what if he has no relatives that could bail it out? But what happened is his business turned more profitable than he expected. And now he came up with more money that he would never have known that he was going to have, that he didn't have when he originally sold the field. Umatzah, now he has newfound money that he didn't have when he sold the field. So the Torah says he could redeem the field himself. So we dash it umatzah prat lamam. Umatzah prat lamotzi, meaning if he already had the money to bail out the field when he sold it, he can't use that money to bail out the field. And there's logic in it because you stop hacking the buyer of China. You're using him as a short-term lender, basically, and you're not allowed to take advantage of a guy because if he's going through the whole effort of assessing the field and doing an appraisal and checking out all the risks, and then he buys it, and then you're only just using him for his money for a couple of days, that wouldn't be appropriate. So therefore, prat lamotzi, if he already had the money when he sold it, you would not let him use those funds to bail out his property. What if he has another field that's far away? He's not allowed to sell that field so that he could use the proceeds of that sale to redeem it, because that's money that he already had when he sold his original field. Or bira v'yigal b'yafa. He shouldn't sell a field that he doesn't want to retain as much, so that he'll have the funds to bail out this field. Because that means when he sold it, he already knew he was buying it right back. That you're not allowed to do. So what do you see from here? Here Umatzah is punkvaker. Here Umatzah has to be dafka found money that wasn't there at the time of the sale. But in the parsha of Ritzicha b'Shoigeg, we see Umatzah means to the contrary. It wasn't there until we see Umatzah means it was there before. It didn't come up now. So Amarava, and for Trava, it's very simple, the answer. Let me just look at the Aleph in the Bach. Amarava. The tense of this word umatzah is very much influenced by the context. It's all about the context. What was the story over there? Umatzah dumya de v'sigayada. The pasuk says if he sells property and then he comes up with money that he didn't have up until now to redeem the field. My sigiyada mehashta, just like his sigiyada means he didn't have the money when he sold it and it came up now. Af matzah nami mehashta. So too the umatzah means that he didn't have any access to funds until now, and now he came up with funds. That's why in the case of the stei achuzah, umatzah means it's something newfound that wasn't there at the time of the sale. But hacha in the parsha Ritzicha, it's minyani dekra. It's umatzah dimya diyar. My yar is midi the isei meikar. The yar was always there. Afumatza nami midi the isei meikar. When that projectile left his hand, at that point the target had to have been in place already. Hazark as Evan. So the Mishnah talks about throwing an Evan into Rishus Harav. One of the Rabbanon told Rava, Mimai the Mechativas Eitim Dirshos. The Gemara at the end, the Mishnah at the end of the Mishnah says, the Mishnah says, right, but then it says later on, in other words, if you're doing an action that's a rishus and it leads to a murder, b'shoigeg, that's where you're going to go. But if you're doing an action that's a mitzvah and it leads to a death, there's no chiyuv goes at all. So for the Gemara, how do you know to say machativus eitzim rishus? Maybe the chativus eitzim that the Torah is talking about when the Torah paints the scenario of the Ritzeich b'shoigeg, maybe it was a chativus eitzim of mitzvah. When is it a mitzvah to chop wood? Dilmo mechativus eitzim the sukkah umechativus eitzim the maracha. You know why he was cutting that wood? He was building a sukkah. You know why he was cutting that wood? Because he was going to bring it to the mizbeach. So maybe even if you're doing a mitzvah, even if you're doing chativus eitzim of mitzvah, you're still going to be chayiv in galus. Illegally. So how could you tell me that if you're involved in a dvar mitzvah and you kill somebody, you're not chayiv galus? Fakert. Maybe the Torah is speaking about a case where there's a mitzvah being done. Amarlei. So Rava answered, Kivan the matzah chatuv lav mitzvah. What if you have wood? You didn't have to chop wood. There's no mitzvah to chop wood for your sukkah if you have it done. At most. But if you already had wood, it wouldn't even be a hechsher mitzvah because the wood's there already, right? So, who adin with the maracha? There's the mitzvah, as you said, the chopping is merely the hechsher mitzvah. But if I have it, I don't need it. So therefore, we call hashtanami lav mitzvah. Therefore, we don't consider even chativas eitzim a mitzvah. At most, we consider it a hechsher mitzvah, and therefore we can still say ma chativa rishus af. This had to be done with rishus. Amen. Ravina asks a kasha of Rava. It says Yotza Av. This is our Mishnah saying Yotza Av Makos Benoi, and by mistake the son dies. There's no chiyuv bolus. The Rav Haroides Talmidai, or a Rebbe who's punishing his Talmud, or a shliach bezdin who's carrying out a sentence of bezdin. Right to Gemara, why don't you say the same thing that you're saying Lagabe chativas eitzim? Why don't you say this Lagabe these things as well? Lema kivan de ilu gomer lav mitzvah. If the son or the Talmud was a perfect Talmud and there was no need to punish him, he didn't need discipline because he was well behaved. There wouldn't be a mitzvah to hit him. So hashtanami lav mitzvah. So once again, why does the Mishnah say that if someone is being right the Talmidoi or Makos Benoi or shlich bezin that he's but golos, that's not called a dvar mitzvah. It's a hechsher mitzvah, not a dvar mitzvah, because v'harayim, if the son didn't need discipline, you wouldn't punch him. Zok to Gemara, no, there it's a mitzvah regardless. Posum apagav de gomir mitzvah. Even if your son is picture perfect, even if your Talmud is perfect, it's still a mitzvah to find an excuse to hit him. The Chsivit says, Yoser bintcha v'yanichecha. If you punish your child, v'yanichecha, he'll let you be duyik, meaning he won't cause you trouble. V'yitein ma'adanim l'nafshecha, he'll bring you nachas if you punish him. So the Sifta brings down that there's a mitzvah to punish your child, to discipline your child, to discipline your Talmud, even if they didn't do anything wrong. You got to find something with which to discipline them. You know why? Because you have to get them accustomed to listening and accepting Musar. If someone never gets Musar in his life, everybody's bound to do something and require something. Then if someone's going to tell him off one day, and they'll be all insulted, and they'll be angry, the Rav told me I shouldn't talk to him davening, I'm not coming to shul anymore. But if someone is accustomed to receiving and processing and accepting Musar, it'll be a healthy thing for him. And the Sifta brings a raya from David, who had a son, Adoniyo, I think. And it said that he went off the path. Why? Because David never punished him. David never disciplined him. Why? Because he was always a good guy. He never required discipline. So you see from there that even if a child doesn't need discipline, it's important to give them discipline so that they should also be trained and accustomed to receiving discipline. Then Rava said, Lav Milsi, the Amri. The truth of the matter is, I don't even need to come on to this terrace. That it's always a mitzvah to discipline your child. Because the kasha was never a good kasha to begin with. You know why? Let's go analyze the pasuk. That's the scenario where this Rishagig murder occurred. The boy ayil, the boy loy ayil. Going into the yar is optional. It's a davar shel rishus, not a davar shel mitzvah. That's when there's a chiyuv for galus. V'sol kedaitach mitzvah. If you're going to say that it even applies to a dvar mitzvah, misagi deloy ayil, by a yar, there's no reason ever why somebody needs to be in a forest. There's never a dvar mitzvah to be in a forest. So therefore, you have arrived from here that the pasuk is speaking by a davar shus, just like the yar is a davar shus. So too, all of the parsha of roitzach b'shoigig applies only to a davar shus, not a dvar mitzvah. Amalei Reb Adar bar Ava l'Rav. Kol eichad d'chsiv asher di'iboyu. It says in the pasuk asher yavoy esrei bar, if he happened to have come into the yar. So you tell me that whenever you mentions the word asher, it means optional. Asher Yava, it means it was optional for him to come. It wasn't mandatory. I'm going to show you a different Asher, which is mandatory. Elamayata, this Asher Yitma v'lo yischate. Are you telling me, the pasuk says, if someone becomes Tomei and he's not matar himself, and he goes into the Beis Hamikdash, he's can coach him, it's a big avera. So you're telling me that's only if it was Asher Yitma? Only if it was optional for him to become Tomei. That's when there's an Isser for him to go into the Beis Hamikdash. Iboy mitame, iboy loy mitame. But Meis Mitzvah. But if he became Tomei through a Meis Mitzvah, the loy sagi the loy mitame, where he does not have an option not to be mitame. It's not a davar rishus. It's a davar mitzvah. Are you actually going to tell me hachadami the potter, someone who became Tomei with a davar mitzvah? Are you telling me that that person is going to be able to walk into the Beis Hamikdash? Avadi not going to say that. So Asher must mean Asher even if it was mandatory to become Tomei. So Asher Yavai Re'ebayar even if it's mandatory. So there's a very big difference. Asher does not mean mandatory. But by the case of Tumah, there are other words in the pasuk that tell us that this Isser to go into the Beis Hamikdash when you're Tomei even applies if you became Tumah through a mandatory act, not an optional act. Why? Kashan Yosam the Amar Krah. There in the parish of Tumah, the pasuk uses extra words to tell us that this applies even if someone was forced to become Tomei, because it says Tomei Yihiyeh. Let's look at the whole pasuk inside. Kol hadageh b'meis v'nefesh adam asher yamus v'lo yischata es miskan asem timei v'nichasa nefesh imi Yisrael ki mei nida lo yizoyrek alav. And then there's extra words of Tomei Yihiyeh. And there's more. Oy Tomas Avoy. We have 5 words that are extra. Tamei yiyah oy tamasevoy. Right? So the Gemara says, from Tamei yiyah, we learn mikol makom, even if you became Tamei through a chiyuv. Zok the Gemara that you cannot say that that's what Tamei yiyah teaches us. Tamei yiyah teaches us another important limud. Hahumi boyle lechetanya. Tamei yiyah l'rabis tvul yoin. What if the person already toiveled? So his tumah is already waning. He just didn't go to the mikveh yet. He just didn't have nighttime yet. So even there, he's going to have a chiyuv if he goes to the Beis Hamikdash. What about Tumas Levoy? Tumas Levoy is l'rabis mechus kippurim. Even if he already toiveled and he was already harav shemshay, but he didn't bring the karbanos yet. That's also mechayiv. Dr. Mar, we still have 1 word out of the 5 that we didn't darshan. I'm using the word oid to teach us this, and therefore we have an extra oid to tell you that even if you became Tamei through a mitzvah, like you became Tamei through a Meis Mitzvah, it's also to go into the Beis Hamikdash. It's also to be Tamei Kach. Gewaltig. So we had a whole shtickle Torah quoting a discussion that Ahu Mirabbanan had from Rava discussing whether or not the parsha of Ritzicha b'Shogig applies if it was a Dvar Mitzvah. And the Gemara came out very geschmack that it does not apply to a Dvar Mitzvah because we learn Ma Yar Rishus of Kol Rishus. But there's another version of this entire conversation, and it occurred relevant to a completely different subject. So let's look at the pasuk that we're going to be analyzing now. It says in the pasuk, "Sheishes yomim tavod." 6 days of a week you work, you do malacha. V'yom hashvi tishbois, but on day 7, which is Shabbos, you don't do malacha. V'chorish v'kotra tishbois. So the problem with this pasuk is, we know that on Shabbos you're not allowed to do any malacha. You're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to bake. You're not allowed to sew. You're not allowed to carry. So why does the Torah limit the Isurim of Shabbos to Chorish and Kotzer? That is the problem with this pasuk. Sheish Shalom Tavod Uviyam Eshvi Tishbois Davke BeChorish UveKotzer Tishbois. So the Gemara is going to darshan that this pasuk can't be speaking about Shabbos because it shouldn't have said BeChorish UveKotzer Tishbois. When is Chorish and Kotzer Osir but not other malachas? During the Shemitah year. So the Gemara wants to say, the Tanoim want to say that this pasuk is referring to a Shemitah year, not the Shabbos. So now let's have a look at the Gemara inside. It says B'chorish u'v'koter tishbois. Rabbi Kiva tells us, Ein tzarich loymar chorish shel shvius k'tzir shel shvius. So we have to take a step back. So Rabbi Kiva is looking at this pasuk. It can't be speaking about Shabbos because on Shabbos all malachas are also. Elamai, it's speaking about Shemitah. Do I need a pasuk to tell me that on Shemitah you're not allowed to plow? Do I need a pasuk to tell me that on Shemitah you're not allowed to harvest? I know that already. So therefore, that you're not allowed to do these malachas on Shvius. It's a pasuk, it's a meforsha pasuk in the pasuk of Shemitah. Sat chalei Sisra, the karmen chalei Sisra. Ella, you know what this pasuk is coming to add to the isurim of Shemitah? Elafilu charish shel erev Shvius shenichnas l'Shvius. If you plowed before Shemitah and the plant wasn't ready to be harvested until the Shemitah year, or or if the plant was planted on Shvius and it grew a certain amount before the end of the year, even though the final harvest is in the 8th year, that's also prohibited. So from this pasuk, we're learning extra isurim lagabe, the mitzvah of Shemitah, that we wouldn't have known from the psukim in the mitzvah of Shemitah themselves. That's how Rabbi Kiva analyzes this pasuk. That's not relevant to our discussion. What's going to be relevant to our discussion is Rabbi Shmuel's opinion. Rabbi Shmuel has a whole different way of looking at the pasuk. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, you know why it says b'chorish u'v'koter tishbois? To tell you a very important halacha in Hilchos Shabbos. So we're not talking about Shemitah. Rabbi Kiva applies this pasuk to Shemitah. No, it's Negei Shabbos itself, and it's telling us a very important lesson. Ma'chorish rishus av kotzer rishus. There's never a mitzvah to do charisha. So just like charisha is rishus, meaning the only time the Torah prohibits you doing charisha on Shabbos is if you're doing it for your own needs. You're not doing it l'tzorech mitzvah. Av ketzir, which sometimes could be a mitzvah, the Torah wants to tell you if it's a mitzvah, there's no prohibition of Shabbos. It's only a ketzir of rishus, similar to the charish. Just like the Yar is a place where anyone could go, so too, we're talking about something that's Advar Rishus, but this halacha wouldn't apply to Advar Mitzvah. So what Rabbi Shmuel is learning from this pasuk is that the Isser of Chilul Shabbos does not apply if you're doing the Chilul Shabbos to be Mekayim Advar Mitzvah, such as Yotzak Tzira Omer Shu Mitzvah. There's a mitzvah to cut down the Omer. Even if it's on Shabbos, you can cut down the Omer. You could do a malach, what would otherwise be a prohibited malach on Shabbos, you'd be allowed to do it because the Torah is only answering things similar to charish, which are adavar hershus. And that's where the Rabbanon asked a kasha on Rava. It wasn't related to our sugya, it was related to the sugya of is a dvar mitzvah osir on Shabbos. Your whole raya that you're allowed to cut down the omer on Shabbos is because charisha is a davar rishus, because you think there's no time where there's a mitzvah to do charisha. But I'll show you there are times where there's a mitzvah to do charisha, and maybe when the Torah says b'charish u'mekater tishbois, the Torah is talking about even a charisha of a mitzvah. Dilma charishas omer the mitzvah. Maybe we're talking about charishas omer where you need to plow because you need to plant the carbon omer, and that even that you're allowed to do on Shabbos. So Zok Gemara Afilu Hachi, nevertheless, Omer Chmon and Tishbois, even though it's a mitzvah, so too Tiras Omer will also be prohibited. So Amalei, Rav answered, I'll bring you a rider that's not true. Kivan the imatza charish, einei charish, charish is not a mitzvah. Most it's a hechsher mitzvah. How do I know? Because if there was already a plowed field, there's no mitzvah b'daflin to go plow a field for the carbon noimer. So therefore, it's not a mitzvah. Similar to what we said in our sugya, since if the Talmud is good, or if the son is good, you don't have to hit him. So therefore, it's only a hechsher mitzvah. So it's exactly the same sugya, but it's exactly the same logic and discussion, but related to a different set of halachas. So lav mitzvah. So therefore, charisha is not a mitzvah, and therefore charisha teaches us that the Torah is only prohibiting on Shabbos a charisha shel rishus, and therefore only a ktsira shel rishus, but ktsira shel omer would be mutter on Shabbos. Zok to Gemara, Eisei Ravina L'Rava, from our Mishnah, it says Yotza ha'av Makos benoi, who would not be chayiv golus. The Rava Roides Talmidai, who would not be chayiv golus or shliach bezdin. V'mai, why did you say the same thing? Lema kiven the ilu gomer lav mitzvah. If this boy would not need the discipline, there is no mitzvah to discipline. Therefore, hashtanami lav mitzvah. So therefore, let's say that it's not a dvar mitzvah, and therefore you should be chayiv for it. Dr. Gemara, no, over there it's a mitzvah no matter what, because Hazram Abel Gav the Gomer Nami Mitzvah Ka'avid, like we said already on number Aleph, this of Yaser Bincha, if you discipline your child, V'yanichecha, he'll leave you, he'll give you nachas. So it's good to discipline your child anyway, as we discussed on number Aleph. Hadar Amarava, then Rava said, just like Rava said, in reference to our sugya, Lav Milsahi. I didn't even need to come on to that. Why? The Amri, Lav Milsahi, it wasn't necessary what he said. Why? Now the Bach makes a lot of changes here. My timer, so he sticks in the word my timer. Why is there no kash here at all? My timer, because Ktsira Dumi de Charisha. What would you say? That Ktsira will be Dumi de Charisha. Just Ma Charisha Matzah Charish Einay Chayresh. Av Ktsira Nami, if you had wheat, it would be a davar rishos, and maybe that's the Ktsira that it's referring to. But Ktsira Shom, I'm sorry? Fresh to Gemara. Visal Kedaitach, mitzvah, if you're going to say that when the Pasuk says Ktsira, it even answers a Ktsira of a mitzvah, such as the Ktsira Omer, Matzah kotzer, einay kotzer. Are you telling me that if you already have cut wheat, you don't have to cut? What are you talking about? Mitzvah likter lavi. It is a mitzvah to make the ktsira. So therefore, you can't tell me ma charisha rishos af ktsira rishos, because ktsira. You can't say that it's going to be that charisha is dumya to ktsira, because charisha could be rishos, could be not rishos. But ktsira, no matter what, even if it's matzah kotzer, it's a mitzvah to cut. Okay, gewaltig. So therefore, the ktsira of rishus, a ktsira that could be rishus, it could be not rishus, that can't be referring to ktsira's omer. So the pasuk cannot possibly be referring to ktsira's omer, and therefore that will be mutter on Shabbos. Let's have a look at Rashi. Lav milzahida omri shahaya lila shiva tshuva nitzachas. I could have come up with a much better teretz, the Kra Lava Mitzvah, to prove that the pasuk is not referring to a mitzvah. Because what was his first teretz? His first teretz is that since if you found it, charisha is not a mitzvah, right? That was his first teretz. But I have a better teretz. My timer, ketzir jumid charish. And what are you going to say? Ma charish b'chol makayim matzah charish einay mitzvah. No matter what, it's never a mitzvah. Lacharish af ketzir. What were you going to have to say? You're going to have to make a dimin. Just like Harisha is never a mitzvah, Af Ketzir would never be a mitzvah. Af Ketzir, B'ach Yaskinon, Shemotza Kotzer, Ein Mitzvah Lixar. So therefore it's never a mitzvah. Yata Ketzir Omer, but it excludes Ketzir Omer, Shafilu Motza Kotzer is a mitzvah Lixar. But by Ketzir Omer, it's different. There, even if you found it cut, it's a mitzvah to cut. So therefore, if you saw that a mitzvah, the Ketzir Shal Mitzvah, if you're going to tell me that the Torah is even answering a Ktsir mitzvah, that's what the Torah is referring to. Matzah kotzer einay kotzer. Are you telling me that there's a time where it could be a ktsir of a rishus, avada not. The ktsir saimer is always a mitzvah, and therefore that's not included in the prohibition of the Torah to cut on Shabbos. Zok the Heilige Mishnah weiter. Ha'av goyla al yidei ben. If a son kills a father b'shagig, if a father kills a son b'shagig, the father goes into golos. Va'ben goyla al yidei av. Now, of course, it's obviously speaking where the father is not disciplined. Because when the father is disciplined, we said it's a davar shel mitzvah, and he wouldn't go into golos. Hakoil goylin al yidei Yisrael. Anybody will go into golos if they kill a yid. We'll see the Gemara who we're referring to. The Yisrael goylin al yidei. And if Yisrael kills any of these people that we're talking about, these phantom people, we'll have to see who they are. The Yisrael will go into golos. Chutz meger toishav. If a yid kills a ger toishav b'shogig, he doesn't go into golos. The ger toishav einay goyla el al yidei ger toishav. A ger toishav will only go into golos if he killed a ger toishav. So the Gemara is going to have to explain to us why. Zok the Gemara, av goyla al yidei abed. How could you say that? Via amrit yota ava makos benoi. And for the Gemara, no, we're talking about the Gomer. We're talking about a son who doesn't need discipline. For the Gemara, amrit avagav the Gomer mitzvah kavod. Didn't we say that it's a mitzvah to discipline your child, even though he's well behaved? The Gemara b'shul yodenagri. This wasn't teaching him Torah. You were teaching him a trade. You were teaching him how to be a carpenter. So you're teaching him an omnus that there's no mitzvah of discipline. What are you talking about? That's also a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to teach your son a trade. So if you heard him b'shoigig while you're teaching him a trade, you shouldn't have to go into goals. And for the Gemara, he was a lawyer. Your son was a lawyer. So he doesn't need a trade. He already has a trade. So what you see from here is there's a mitzvah to teach your child a parnasa, but not two. You can't say, well, I want to teach him two trades because if this doesn't work out, that'll work out. That already, there's no mitzvah. The mitzvah is only to teach your son the first trade. Zok to Gemara. Ben goyla al yidei. If a son kills a father b'shogig, the son goes into golos. We're mini frag to Gemara. Very interesting kasha. Maka nefesh. It says maka nefesh prat l'maka oviv. Now, how do you see from maka nefesh prat l'maka oviv? You see from the following Zot Rashi. Maka nefesh. Somebody who you're only chayiv if you take away his nefesh. A stranger, if you take away his nefesh, then you're chayiv. But a father, if you merely make a chabura in him, you're already chayiv misa. So maka nefesh, dafka is someone who you have to kill his nefesh to become chayiv misa or golus. That's who the pasuk is talking about. But the pasuk is not talking about a son who killed his father. Rav Kana loy kasha harab Shimon harabanon. This is totally in the machlokes Rav Shimon and Rabbanon. Now we have a little bit of a chazara from what we had in Sanhedrin. We remember that the Rabbanon held, if you want to list off the Mises Bezin in order of how severe they are, Skila is the most severe, Sreifa is the second, Hereg is the third, and Chenek is the fourth. But Rabbi Shimon said, Sreifa is the most severe, then comes Skila, then comes Chenek, and then comes Hereg. So we're focusing on the Chenek and Hereg, because if someone kills his father, he's Chayiv Hereg. But if someone makes a chabur on this father, he's chayiv chenek, because it's stam moishamus, it's misastam. So let's analyze this now. Reb Shimon Domer chenek chamer misayiv. According to Reb Shimon, who holds that the misa that you get for making a chabur on your father is a more severe misa than you get for even killing him, right? Shikul sayiv nitna l'chapara. Where could you be yoytze and get a kapara by golus? That's only if it's something that if you doesn't bemaze it, you would only get hereg. To shvacher avera, it requires a shvacher oinish. Only hereg, their golus could deal with this. But your father would shigas chenek. If you kill your father, the chiv chenek. So who said if you did a avera that gets you chenek? Who said that that could be wiped away with golus? Lo nita l'chapara. So therefore, the brisa that says maka nevish prat l'maka oviv, that the son doesn't go into golus if he kills his father, is going according to Reb Shimon, because golus wouldn't be good enough for someone. Had he done it b'mezid, he would have been chayiv chenek. But l'Rabbanan the amri sayiv chomer mechenek. According to the Rabbanan, well, sayiv is chomer. Then hayig oviv b'shoigig is a shilgas sayifu, And therefore, why if he killed his father with Shigas Haif? Because you always get the more Chomer the Kamisa. Therefore, Shigas Haif, Nitna Lachapar. About Rav Amar, when it says Prat Lamaka Aviv, doesn't mean Prat is someone who killed his father by mistake. It means Prat Loisa Chabur Ba'aviv, B'Shogig. You might have thought that someone who even does a Chabur on his father but doesn't kill him has to go into Golos. So Kedai the Chamina. Kivin the Bemezid Bar Katolu. Vibalt, if he made a Chabur Bemezid, he would be Chayiv Misa. So if he did it B'Shogig just like by murder, Nami Ligli, you might have had a Havamina. That if someone merely injures his father, B'Shogig, he would go into Golos, because if he did it Bemezid, it would be Chayiv Misa. Kamash Malon. Maka Nevish Prat Lamaka Aviv. If you hit your father, even though it's b'shoigig, and you made a chabura, there is no kapara of golos. Gewaltig. Zog the heilige Mishnah weiter, HaKoil Goylen al Yidei Yisrael, the Yisrael Goylen al Yideyim. Zog the Gemara. Let's explain this. HaKoil Goylen al Yidei Yisrael, what does that mean? Lasuya Mai, Lasuya Eved v'Kusi. So if an Eved or a Kusi kills a Yid b'shoigig, the Eved or the Kusi goes into golos. Tanina la de Tanur Rabbanan. We have a brisa that says something very similar. Eved v'Kusi, Goyle, they get golos if they killed b'shoigig, v'loike, and they get malchus ayidei Yisrael. So we have to understand what aver did they do to the yid that they would get malchus for. Golos, it's obvious they killed the b'shoigig, but v'loike ayidei Yisrael requires an explanation. What is it that the Bryce is referring to? But for our purposes, we're just looking for a makar, for a support that they go into golos. So we got it. Eved v'kuti Goyle, v'Yisrael Goyle v'loike. So now we have pshat of their Mishnah. It's speaking about a kuti and Eved. A Yisrael will go into goals if he kills one of them, and the kusi and Eved will go into goals if they kill a Yid. So Bishlama Eved the kusi Goyla al Yidei Yisrael v'loike. What's the case? Goyla is the kotlai. V'loike the latye. If he curses a Yid, Allah is Israel lav. You're not allowed to curse it. You're not allowed to curse a Yid. So if you curse a Yid, you get malchus. So that's what it's referring to. Should a goy curse a Yid, the goy will get malchus. However, El Yisrael, Goyla v'loika the kuzi, Vishlema Goyla, I understand the kotli. El loika amai, the latcha, cursing a goy, cursing a kuti or a ger would not, maybe a evet, but cursing a kuti who's not oisamai amcha, you wouldn't get malchus for it. V'nasi ba'amcha loisor v'oisamai amcha, and we know the kutim are oiv de avodah zara. So if you curse them, there would not be allowed. So, Oibazoli, what is the case? What is the case? What is the case where you would get malchus for doing something to a goy? It can't be for cursing. What if you said edus on a kuti that the kuti did something that he's chayiv malchus for? You said edus on him that he ate a piece of chazer, right? So now you get petch. The Gaval say Gabe Evet, Shahid by Buzam. So then you have to say that when it says if an Evet or a Kuti did that to a Yid, he'd get Malchus. But an Evet couldn't have said Edus on a Yid because an Evet's not a kosher Edus. Evet bar Edus too. So that's not a good option either. Amar Bacha Berdavika, Hacha B'maya Skinon, Kagoin Sheiko, Haka, Shein Bar Shavapruta. Now, normally, if you hit somebody, the Torah says you have to pay. You have to pay chamisha dvarim, nezek, tzar, ripu, shavas, and boishes, and that's your kapara. Well, what happens if there's no shavapruta? So there's no chiv to pay. So there's an aver there. That's what you would get malchus for, as Rashi says. Shein bo shavapruta, shem yesh bo tashlume pruta mishal ben aloika, because we learned that the ofid miksuf elaris the fair strips of Torah hovel bechaveres lo tashlumen. But the Chayim B'Shav Pruta, so there's no Tashlum in there. They're like a Sha'avar Aloy Soisef Pen Yosef. So that's what we're talking about. So if a Yid hit a guy and it was less than Shav Pruta, he got Malchus. Not a guy, a Kusi or an Evet. If the Evet hit a Yid or Kusi hit a Yid and it was less than Shav Pruta, he would also get Malchus. Domar Bam Bam Yochanan Iko Akah She'ein Bo Shav Pruta Loike V'Loy Makshinan Hakah Leklala. We don't say Zok Rashi Keshem She'ein Loy Kal Kilalosai. It says V'Amcha. It says V'Nasi B'Amcha Loisar. So therefore, you don't get Malchus. If you would hit a Kusi because he doesn't have heirs, if you would curse a Kusi, you don't get Malchus. That's only cursing. But if you hit him, even though he's Eino Isa Mais Amcho, you will still get Malchus. However, Uplukti Sanhedrin, we had a Machloikis in Sanhedrin, Dika the Makish, Vika the Makish. It's important that in Makos, the Gemara reminds us that we just learned Sanhedrin and we should remember some of it. So there was a Machloikis there, if you're Makish Hakah to Klola, and you say just like by Klola, if you're Makal a Kusi, you don't get Malchus. So too, if you hit a Kusi, you don't get Malchus. Our Brisa doesn't hold like that. Our Brisa holds that if you hit a Kusi, you do get Malchus. About Baruch Hashem, we finished Daf Ches in Makos. Tomorrow we'll learn Daf Tes Bez Hashem.
Yosy, Yosel,
Yeah.
just on a side.